This is Business Anonymous. I started doing business since I was 18, full-time at least, but I've started doing business selling trading cards even when I was in school since I was 10 years old. I'm doing this solo podcast anonymously so that no one that I work with see this and that there's no conflict of interest. This is for business people and I'll share my philosophies, frameworks, thought processes, everything.
Business people are resource allocators. This is something that I've been thinking about, at least for today, because I was trying to think about like what the primary purpose or action or value that a business person actually brings, right? And at first, I kind of thought that the business person's like main character trait should be their high agency. I think because I saw a study or I saw some sort of post about how like 99% of all billionaires or whatever, the one common trait they have in common is that they're high agency. You know, I've also seen studies where they're like, business people, you need to have the fire behind you, you need to have something in front of you, carrying you along. So meaning like for business people, you need to be riddled with insecurity and you also need to have very strong desire to prove everyone else wrong. And then you also need to have high pain tolerance so you never stop. And obviously, like, there's the other concept then, in order to, like, the primary action of a business person is just being a very good marketing, sales, or product person, right? But I was thinking about this. I think that's actually someone who can allocate resources well. And that resource allocation is the primary function of the business person or the CEO in a company. Not risk taking, not any of that. And let me explain why. In every sort of like concept with economics, I think it comes down to like you have time, or labor, you have land, and you have capital. And in this context, when I say time versus labor, you can kind of think of it as the same thing because your time as the business person is basically like a form of labor, except that you are seeing yourself as like a form of labor for the company, right? At the very beginning, let's say, for example, you're starting with $0 or close to $0. But everyone has time at the beginning. And so where the resource allocation journey kind of starts is that when you have your own time, but you have no money, you have no labor, you have, no land, and you have only yourself and your own time to go and make money and make trades. And at the very beginning, it's tough because by default, like you already have Instagram, TikTok, all of these distractions, your friends that are kind of like taking your time away from doing business. And not necessarily a bad thing, right? To go out partying with your friends and blowing off steam. But if your goal is actually to do business or to trade your way up, then you're basically like, if you can think about it as you're your own employee and you allow your employee to spend half the day working and half the day partying with friends and allowing your employee to go getting wasted on Friday so that on Saturday he cannot work. Like, I think any sort of business person would probably not encourage their own employee to do it, but then they don't hold themselves to their standards. And I'm not even talking about business people, I'm just talking about like at the very beginning when you're starting out in business and you have no employees, it's just yourself. So later, I think it becomes like the next level that you get to is that you're one person, but you finally like accumulated some capital, some money. And so the next part is hard because you now have to like risk capital, meaning that you have to use your hard-earned money, which you traded up using time, and you have to basically take this money to exchange it with maybe employees, like in the form of salary, to hopefully make more money, right? So the risk later on is you, instead of just trading your own time, you now continue trading your own time, and you also trade some of your capital. And so especially since in these two cases, it's both your personal time and your personal money, it is tough to make like good decisions. For example, you may think to yourself, okay, like in my initial stage of my business, I should hire someone to take over all of the website development work, right? So that now I have more time to do sales and marketing. But the thing is like the emotional boy in your mind. So I think of it like every mind or every person has a logical driver and an emotional boy. So the emotional boy inside of you doesn't let you do that because the emotional boy is saying, you spent all of your time hard work to get this money. Couldn't you just do website development, the delivery of service like in your own time? Or, wouldn't it be better to delay hiring your first developer employee and just kind of like keep doing the work yourself and like until you get a bigger nest egg? And so the logical man in your mind will always want to like make better trades, but the emotional boy is kind of like pulling you down. So then you kind of like move on to the next step where, let's say, for example, you do have a few employees, like 3 employees, you have more of the time back and you have more of the capital back. And at this stage, you basically need to keep getting yourself to do more. So instead of like getting bored, you need to continue like using your time and your capital to continue making the trades that you know work. And then when those trades no longer work, like when you've already hired 3 web developers and they're already busy, but now the next thing that you need to hire is a marketing person to scale the reach of your company, then you have to like do new sort of things and new sort of hires. And then that will require you to like obviously lose money and lose time, but you've already been through that process once again. But the emotional boy will tell you like, remember all of the mistakes that you made, don't make them. And the logical man who's driving your mind basically has to say, I know that these things happen, but I still have to do it. Okay, so then what's the next step? So in my opinion, like the next step after that is once you've kind of like accumulated enough wealth or money for basically for your own personal subsistence, if you want to call it that. So it could look like in many forms. It could be maybe like you already have like $1 million or $2 million cash in bank, and now you already have enough money coming in passively from the 4% rule where all of your living expenses are paid off, and then you think to yourself, why do I have to work? Right? Like I think it's normal for people to get to the stage and have this question. The other part of it is like maybe you get to $500,000, but then your business also has some sort of recurring side of it where your business is bringing in, let's say, for example, $150,000, $200,000 a year in profit. And so like, you know that you could spend maybe a third or half of it and save the other half. And so you don't really need to like quote level up or grow your business or to risk any more resources. And the resources just kind of add on to one another. But the problem with this is that if you don't grow your resources or attempt to like level up as a resource allocator, then your business will always be stuck at the same level, like the same maybe revenue or profit per year, and likely it will go down because even if you are in this example, like having a business with recurring customer base, you'll likely have churn, which could be anywhere from like 5 to God knows like 20% for any sort of like recurring revenue business, right? So what's the point of all of this? I was just kind of like thinking about this out loud because I think it's important to really like have clarity on what our job is as business people. And I was just trying to think this to myself. And this is also something that will kind of like force you to be like, okay, whenever you try to do like some form of work, you always need to keep it the back of your mind that eventually, is this like the first question you have to ask yourself is like, is this a form of work that I want to continue doing, or is this something that someone else will take over later? And the second part of it is like, okay, if this is something that I want someone to take over later, then how can I like set it up in that way? So for example, like if you want to kind of get into content marketing, it's like, do you build a personal brand or do you kind of have like a company YouTube? And then I'm not saying if there's one decision's more correct than the other, or that you cannot do both. But it's like if you do a company YouTube, fewer people watch it. But if you do a personal brand, then more people watch it, but then it's not part of the business, you know? But then at the same time, like, do you really need to have a sellable business, or do you need to get yourself out of media? Or can you just like have everyone else on your media team, like where you're only the talent and front facing, and so everything else, like the recording, editing, everything gets subbed out, so that you obviously will always need to use your time to be the talent front of the camera, but you can also compress the amount of time spent, maybe like 1 day a week, and you can have everything else kind of like running automatically, smoothly without you. And for this note, it's like you basically need to, I think at every level of the business, you first of all need to recognize that you're always making trades, like you're always trading time or money for another resource, like labor or capital or whatever. And the next part of it is that at every step of the journey when you level up, I think you always have to be aware that there's going to be an emotional boy inside your mind fighting with your logical driver. And this is going to be a battle that you'll face at every step of the way when you're leveling up as a resource allocator. And yeah, so that's kind of like what I had for today. And yeah, that's it.